everyone. Happy Friday and good whatever moment of the day you are enjoying on your time zones. Even happy Saturday if we have people from the future joining us now live. We will be spending the next hour talking about the compassionate leader and how kindness and compassion can make for the superpowers of great leaders that both equally care for people and inspire action. It is a topic that we were looking forward to ever since we saw the October series posted. And we do have an amazing lineup of speakers for today. My name is Minola Jacques. I am your co-host for today. As usual, we have Jessa taking very good care of us, doing her magic with tech and logistics. And please do consider the comments and the chat your own personal conversation space. First and foremost, keep telling us where you're connecting from. It's always so good to see where Hacking HR reaches you in this wonderful world. And consider the questions as much yours as it is our panelists, and drop us your thoughts, your stories, your experiences. If we learned one thing is that irrespective of what topics we talk about, there are so many nuances across cultures, generations, geographies. So do let us know. Jessa, please help me bring up the amazing speakers on the screen. In the meantime, I will just confirm that we are recording this conversation, and you will get the recording later either in our LinkedIn space or hackinghrlab.io. And with this, the commercial announcements are done. So let's make the best out of our very, very short hour today. And you are all friends and Hacking HR veterans. You know the drill. The e-mic goes around the screen clockwise. That means, Mary, you will be our pioneer today. And the first question is always easy. First, shortly introduce yourselves and do share something that profoundly changed your understanding and expectations from kindness and compassion in the workplace. It can be a leader, it can be a story, it can be a life event. So something that profoundly shaped how you think and how you show up in kindness and compassion in the workplace today. Mary, so great to see you.
It is wonderful to see you as well. Isn't it just wonderful that I get the chance to go first on the whole panel? I mean, lucky me. So again, Mary Finch, and I am in Chicago, head of people for Iris Worldwide. And the question that you asked me in regards to what has shaped my idea of kindness or compassion, it was really based on behaviors. Even the way that I entered into HR 20 years back, it was because I had an example of what a manager was, and it was my direct manager, without, of course, saying where it was at and who it was. But that example shaped my ideal of when it was my time and my platform. I have an obligation to be able to do things a little differently. And in my opinion, there was a wrong. So I wanted to, in my way, do a right. So it was the behavior that I saw of how I felt that particular manager thought about not only the people within the HR department, but how I felt that manager wasn't as kind as I would have been on certain situations. And that behavior shaped my ideal of the person that I wanted to be when I got in that platform.
Thank you so very much. Rusty, hello. Good to have you as a speaker on this panel. And everybody, Rusty is our fellow Hacking HR moderator extraordinaire. So do go to our space and watch some recordings with him working his magic. Good to see you.
Thank you, Manola. So kind. It's always great to be here. And I just love to be here when you're at the helm. So thank you for leading us today. So I'm Rusty Gaylord. I'm in California and in Silicon Valley, and I am an executive coach. I really help high achieving people who are heart centered to get really clear on how they want to show up as a leader in the world and do it. So I come to this work after working in the corporate world for a lot of years, 14 years at Apple, MBA, and other things. But compassion is interesting because, working in the corporate world is not actually a word that I ever heard when I was around the corporate world. But one of the stories to me that really brought this into focus is actually an old one. So when my dad passed away a few years ago, I was going through old papers and that kind of thing, and there was this memo. So of course, this is before email, any of that stuff. Like, this is in the days when people actually wrote paper memos. So he had this paper memo that he had received as a thank you from all of the administrative assistants, or secretaries, what they used to call them back in the day, right, on his floor. And I was like, they thanked him for what he had done. And I was like, oh, that's intrigued by this. Like, what did he do? And I flipped the page, and behind that was a memo that my dad had written. And my dad was leading a team of people, and they were in the middle of their annual plan. And, basically this was the day when you didn't do stuff on the computer. You wrote stuff out by hand, and you gave it to your secretary, and your secretary would type it up. And all the people were having their secretaries stay until the wee hours of the morning, late at night, doing this. And basically the memo from my dad said, you've known about this annual plan for months. It's on the radar. We've been talking about it. And your lack of planning is not an excuse to ask these people to stay away from their families and be there late at night to try to, type up your materials that you prepared at the last minute. So without further, from this point forward, without prior permission, none of the secretary pool can stay here after hours unless you get my personal approval. And they all were very grateful for that and so on. But, to me, this was interesting, right? If you put yourself back in this day of, almost, you think about the Mad Men kind of mentality, right? Which is typewriters and paper and all that kind of stuff. And for my dad to do that, I was like, I didn't know that about him. So it was a touching story to me, not directly about compassion, but an expression of compassion and an act of compassion.
Thank you so very much for sharing the story, Rusty. Tammy, good to have you here today to inspire.
Thank you, Manila. Great to be here and to see everyone. I'm Tammy Chapek. I own a leadership development company called We Inspire. We do coaching, leadership training, and development with a heart towards women and underrepresented groups. We really believe that everyone has an authentic voice and special sauce to bring to the table, and that should really be highlighted, including, I think, that's where compassion kind of comes into play, is that understanding that we all have something different to give, and helping people to, tap into that and realize that. And I think I personally came to that conclusion myself. One of my very first managerial roles, I was emulating some driver-like behaviors from my leadership, and it just wasn't working. I was running people over. I wasn't paying attention to what people needed in the moment. I wasn't being compassionate or understanding. It was all about the deadline and the work and getting the things done. So I realized at that time that actually was very much out of alignment for me as a human being and my personal values, but it was very disrespectful to the people that I was managing, leading directly or indirectly through that work. So that was a big game changer for me, into realizing that compassion and kindness can go a really long way.
Thank you so very much, Julie. So good to see you in this lineup. Welcome.
Great to see you too, Manila. So my name is Julie Masaja. I'm the Chief People Officer for two media agencies, CMI Media Group and Compass. I'm responsible for leading the people function, which we did name the people function for a reason. The most inspiring thing for me has been actually being given permission to live the values that I personally have, because they align with the values of the leadership team that I work with. That really has inspired me. I think, similar to what Tammy mentioned, the culture that you're in doesn't always give you that permission to feel like you can lead that way. So having an amazing CEO, founder of our organization, who not only empowered but encouraged to lead that way, has been really the most inspirational thing.
Thank you. And what a treat to complete this panel with Frank. It's been too long since we were in the same conversation. Good to see you.
Yeah, hello, my friend. I don't know. That's really hard lineup to follow. Maybe I'll take a bit of a different angle, because what you all were saying was already inspiring me. and I was taking notes about that. I would say it's a threefold. So Frank Gonzalez, my pronouns are he, him, his, director of equity, inclusion, belonging. But what defines me more is the state of where I'm at right now, as being a very enthused and involved father and a very inspired husband. I, owe a lot of foundational, just kind of confidence through my spouse. I would say the threefold, or the three kind of big events, I would say, is going back to like childhood, where those behaviors like Mary was talking about. I think my parents, regardless of all the trials and tribulations that we experience, they really almost ran like a halfway house. And if you know what a halfway house is, it's like those that are in their time of need. And gosh, but they divorced at such a early age, but both of them housed so many different friends or family at various stages of their kind of low points, without judgment, to get them back on their feet, and having very little, still always extending that. So I had a lot of roommates kind of growing up in that compassion, right? So compassion is empathy and meeting and connecting where people are at. And so I think seeing that just, continuously and consistently was one game changer. And I think another one was, a teacher. I think a lot of folks can relate to the teachers that have inspired us, that were basically our coaches and managers, right, at the time. And but definitely going to school really tired and dozing off, and not because I wasn't interested in the subject, but really there was a lot of things going on at home. And having that one teacher, and I will name her, Esther Torres. The late Esther Torres. She was a pivotal point in my life, because there was a test that day and I was dozing off, and rather than, he's a troublemaker, or he's just not interested, it's like, what else can be true? What else is going on in his life? And I opened up and said, hey, I've got this going on. It was a late night on a school night. This, giving me, literally allowing me a few minutes to just kind of catch myself, right? And those kind of pivotal moments there. Mm-hmm. And the last one I would say is professionally. We always think there's always a moment where we think that we have it really ill. But I started off in health and human services, where literally, it's life and death situations based on processes, and seeing folks at their most vulnerable, and be able to advocate and have compassion on their behalf, and not just your direct reports, really felt good to continuously do that. And I would say that's just a huge pivotal point in my career, at least for over a decade, doing that, and it just becomes a natural advocacy to have that compassion.
Thank you so very much, everyone, for sharing your stories and your key moments. And please, I keep encouraging everybody in the audience, do share your stories with us in comments. These are always such touching pieces of our lives. Now, I would invite you to take a few minutes and really, through the lens of kindness and compassion, talk a little bit about what differentiates good leaders from great leaders. We heard some behaviors, we heard some words, we heard a little bit about some values that drive compassionate leaders. But how do we see and recognize great leaders through the lens of kindness and compassion at work? And I will not name anyone to lead us. Let's just see who wins the unmuting competition. Well, Mary.
I wanted to come off of mute because Frank inspired me when listening to him. And I say that because when we talk about the difference between good and great, again, it goes back to behaviors, but it was something that he touched on that made me think about some skills aren't teachable, right? And to that end, thinking about how even my own childhood and the behaviors, the experiences, the exposure that I had, those were things that aligned in my DNA as my personality. It transformed me to the person that wanted to see kindness in people, that want to be kind to people, that wants to be good to people. that wants to treat people fair, right? To want to see them succeed, reason why we're all in HR. However, if it's not something that a person really wants to do, it's going to be exposed. If that's not the person that they are, they won't, the character won't show up, right? Between the organic person that we're seeing. So the difference between, someone being a good leader, it's it's in them. You can see past them. You can see them. It's nothing that they have to say. It's in the actions. We can say things all the time. We have visions. We have, mission statements. And if you are not living the things that you say that you want to see, then you're really not the person that we can believe for you to be, right? So I'll pause on that, and I'll pause.
Thank you, Mary.
I'd love to jump in on that because I think this is a great conversation. When it comes to compassion, I'm actually of the belief that that's innate in all of us. I think if you strip away a lot of the a lot of our focus on goals and money and competition and success and all the stuff that gets wrapped around us through so much of our lives and our upbringing, fundamentally, people are compassionate. Right? We look at another person and we see another person, especially if it's someone we have a connection to, right? We want to help them. We want to protect them. We want to do things that make their life better for people that are close to us. I think that one of the, I happen to be wrapping up a year-long program at Stanford called the Applied Compassion Training Program. And I'm just wrapping it up. And one of the elements that they've described about compassion, and there's multiple of them, but one of them is this idea of common humanity, which is if you have a connection to the other person and you see the other person as just like me, then you're way more likely to have compassion for them. And that makes sense, right? When you think about a friend who's suffering, you're going to feel compassion for them. You think about a loved one, you will feel compassion. But you see someone on the other side of the world, or perhaps on the other side of the office, and it's easy to, in your mind, say, well, that person's different from me, and therefore I don't feel compassion. And so I actually want to come back to this idea that, compassion for most of us is innate when we feel, when the circumstances are right. And those circumstances and how you see the world can be learned and shaped. And so I actually think that this idea that, can compassion be taught? I think it can when you break it down into the different elements. It's not about teaching compassion because we're naturally compassionate. It's about teaching the things that get away of it and how do you strip those away so that you can show up with compassion.
I think that's beautiful, kind of calling out that we all have it in us. We just might have buried it on accident. I think that's really an interesting way to look at it. And I think that makes perfect sense. When I think of good to great leadership through the lens of compassion and kindness, the one thing that really stands out to me is understanding that people are it, right? Like it's bringing humanity into the equation, and it's remembering that people are what makes the business work. It's what makes the environment click, whatever type of work you're in, whether it's service-based or product-based work or whatever that is, right? People have to be part of it to make it matter. And if we walk away from remembering that the humanity behind it all, right, that's where we lose compassion and lose kindness. But if we focus on the people and what the people need, each individual person, is a necessary part of the team. And the more we recognize their individual needs and support them and care for them and make them feel valued, right, the rest follows. And there's so much great evidence out there to support that, caring and compassion and empathy leads to greater work results too, because people want to do better when they feel like they're in a place that they are really cared for. So I think there's such an interesting dynamic in there of remembering, like, it isn't about the work, right? It's about the people, and that ultimately then leads to the great work.
If we're going around still in this clockwise motion.
I was going to try to break it, but go for it.
So going along the lines of what Rusty said around this being innate in us, there's a famous quote from Indra Nooyi, who's the former CEO of Pepsi, and she says along the lines of, it's not word for word, but if you assume good intent, your whole mindset will shift. And so what I have found is that leaders who give the benefit of the doubt, leaders who want to seek to understand why and educate, those have been the best leaders, because they truly are able to break down whatever perceived barriers, concepts like money and climbing the ranks and things like that that get in the way, and truly just want to connect with you as a person. And that is what I have found has been the hallmark of a great leader, is that they're connecting with you on that person level.
You know, I'll come at it at practical and research piece, right? And I'll start with numbers. So there are some numbers you can put to this, and this is both a global, but it's just a connection piece, because we're talking about connections and leadership and the differentiating of good to great. 60-40, okay? 60-40. 60% in general is who you are and the shape of who you are. Maybe what Rusty was saying about the, innate in you, or even a combination of what Mary was saying, things that have, environmentally you picked up, but it's who you are, 60%. The other 40% is an environmental reaction to what's around us, whether it be in the workplace, our personal lives, the blend of the two, a number of different things, right? Accountabilities that we have, the worry and baggage that we carry, all these different things, 60-40, right? And when things are done around us, that 40%, we refer back to that 60, and it can nudge and it goes back and forth in general, 60-40, 60-40. But in leadership, right? I asked that question back to those that are listening and even to our wonderful moderator, right? What leadership style most resonates with you, right? The most popular ones out there, whether it be transformational leadership, charismatic leadership, authentic leadership, et cetera, servant leadership, right? The greatest variance or predictor is this development piece, but selfless and altruistic development of others, literally meaning that as in I inspire or I enable my environment, there is absolutely no personal agenda on there. True compassion, right? And you all know what I mean. If you don't know what I mean, let me expand on that just a minute. In our careers and in our lives, the 60% baggage that we carry sometimes, we are self-serving as humans. We are trying to climb the ranks. We're trying to get noticed culturally too. We're trying to get noticed through our resume, and there's 1,000 applicants or other folks that are up on the project line or on the bench. And so we're just trying to get noticed. And there is a bit of self-preservation and self-servitude, right? And once you break past that and you literally do not care about yourself and you literally are trying to develop others, that enablement right there as a leader goes from good to great. And even as a follower, because we're all followers, and I always preach about followership, which is just the mirror of leadership, and saying how do we allow ourselves to be enabled, right? That 40% environmental reaction is I think it's that really true compassionate self. And when I say practical, it's just this: I don't care who gets promoted and how they get promoted, whether it be my own people, other people, whether they jump rank in me and things like that, right? I'm literally going to contribute to the development of others selflessly. And you infuse compassion there naturally to other folks. And you're going to have some hesitation, because people are going to be like, okay, what's in it for Frank? What's in it for Mary? What's in it for Tammy? What's in it for Rusty? What's in it for Julie? Right? You're like, there's that gentle, like, no, because in my past, people have kind of burned me and done it because it's only elevating them. Even the coaches and leaders that say, I'd like to promote people. But do you like to promote people because it makes you look good? Or do you literally promote people because you know that they are past that development plateau that you no longer can take them along with, right? They should not be following in your footsteps, but following alongside to go beyond any imagination you ever had. So it's a long-winded answer, but I would say 60-40, and it's this enablement piece right here where it's very altruistic and not self-serving at all.
Yes, please, Rusty, jump back in.
I mean, just one quick comment. I mean, we could end right there. I mean, that was brilliant. So thank you, Frank. I just wanted to throw one other point on, well, maybe two, from the good to great perspective. Number one is nobody's perfect, right? And I think that the great leaders are the ones that are always paying attention to the stuff that Frank was talking about, right? Like how much of this is self-serving, how much of this is promoting others. It really requires a degree of self-awareness. And so when we talk about developing and developing others, it's developing others, but it's also developing yourself to continue to improve your own self-awareness, your own ability to navigate uncomfortable situations, to connect with other people, to promote other people, to recognize when you're being self-serving and when you're not being self-serving. So I don't think nobody's 100% one or the other, right? We're all navigating this middle ground. And so that's why I think that the self-awareness and the personal growth and development is so important, because you get better and better at figuring out, how do I navigate this middle ground?
Mm. Well, I would like to bring into the conversation a point that was made in our panel yesterday. And it was a very big point around authenticity and on how we could become aware of displaying certain behaviors or saying certain things within certain sets of circumstances. But there's research proving that when it is not authentic, it's actually more damaging than not saying or not doing anything at all. So I'm really happy that very, very early into our conversation, all of you touched on this, big question, like, are these teachable? And to what extent and in what way, especially with, all the developmental piece going on at the moment. Now, I would really like to put a bit of a different spin to the conversation. What are some of the obstacles within workplaces against kindness and compassion? And there are a few things that come to mind. I do believe that there is this perception that these are soft skills, ergo they make us soft. So what are some of the things that we absolutely need to dismantle, maybe even beyond the workplace, to bring kindness and compassion in our professional lives? And Julie, I would ask you to be the pioneer for this one, and then everybody build your conversation.
I have a lot of thoughts on this. So I think that the first thing is that compassion and accountability are not on the same continuum, meaning that you can be compassionate and still develop and hold your employees accountable. And that's actually helpful for them. It's not one or the other. And I think that's a self-limiting belief that a lot of leaders have, is that I can't be both. And that if I'm at this end of the spectrum, I can't also do this. I think some of the other things that have contributed to that is our lack of connection to our coworkers. I think over the years, we do more with less. There's always this desire to continuously grow culturally in the careers people have. And I think that gets in the way of that connection. I think it becomes, I think, Frank, you touched on it. There's this self-centric point of view of how do I survive, right? Versus how do I help others? And I think that's a level of self-awareness of asking yourself, how did I do in being a compassionate leader? How did I do in being an accountable leader? How did I do in being a value-based leader in how I work with the people that I come across day to day, versus it just being this one or the other conversation?
I love that call out that it's not a net zero sum game.
Yeah, I was just going to jump in on that exact same point. I think, I entered the workforce in the 90s, and no one was talking about compassion back in that time. And in fact, for most of the first several decades of my career, it was like, well, you leave all that stuff at home, right? When you show up to work, you're here to get work done, and you're here to focus, and it's all about results. And so there's a whole mindset shift, I think. And I think the point that Julie's making is so important, because somehow it was trained into us, like compassion happens outside of the workforce, and when you're at work, you get the work done. And this recognition that they're not in opposition, that actually they can be, it can be an additive effect when you are both focused on the results and holding people accountable, but you're doing it in a compassionate way. And that's what I find to be so compelling about this idea is the biggest obstacle is just your thinking and your assumptions about it. And your willingness to experiment a little bit and be like, okay, can I hold someone accountable, but not in an Elon Musk style, right? But more in the, seeing them as a person and seeing that, recognizing. And I think Frank's story from his school that you shared, Frank, was so brilliant because it doesn't take a long time just to acknowledge and to have a brief conversation about, hey, what's going on? It doesn't mean it's your problem to solve, but it allows you to see the other person and to engage with them and to recognize them and then have a conversation about, okay, you're still here and we still got things we need to get done. So how are we going to navigate this? And now all of a sudden you can be sitting on the same side of the table as opposed to sitting opposite sides of the table, kind of like arguing at each other. So so much of this is a mindset and a willingness to kind of experiment, wade in and tolerate the discomfort of doing that, especially people who are my age who are like, I never did this at work. How do I do this?
I think that there's so much to this. Manolo, I love that you said, let's dismantle, right? Because I do think there's been a common, and to Rusty's point, right? There's been a common long understanding, at least in US business, that, you come in, you do the work, you leave the personal life at home. I think, we're seeing lots of shifts and changes in acceptable leadership styles. And if you study, transformational leadership, that is very, very like right on the wall. However, I think COVID, as bad as it was for a lot of people, it was one of these things that was a game changer for this conversation. It really taught us, all of us, regardless of gender or age or how long you've been doing this or not, right? That compassion has to matter, that mental health and well-being and overall well-being matters as people come into the office and show up, and especially if you want to get any kind of good quality results out of the work that you're doing. So I think that we do have to dismantle this connection of compassion to weakness or compassion to being I don't know what the word I'm looking for is, so but just too loose with your rules, right? I agree with Julie on they're not the same spectrum. And I think we have to keep defining and redefining and kind of helping people see that this compassion is actually a really powerful leadership skill and something that can be used quite well to make everybody healthy and show up, in the best way possible.
Wonderful. Mary, I saw you unmuted. Yes, please.
Yeah, my response won't be long because I know that this question has been answered very thoroughly, I feel like, between the three. But the one thing that stood out to me is, Rusty, when you made the comment in regards to just introducing what's considered to be like the softness of kindness and just thinking about others and, the difference between work and personal, and you leave your personal business at home and you come into work and you work. And I find it so interesting because that's why we exist, right? Because the policies in HR were there, right? So we created policies that were there to support different transitions. Now they evolved along the way, but it's ironic that even though we were saying one thing, we had things that were in place to support things that might have happened to people during periods of time. So the original question, I think, Manolo, when you talked about like obstacles, sometimes the obstacle can be between business leadership or business leaders and HR, and just being open sometime between coaching, because business leaders are thinking about the business. They're thinking about how to keep things going, how to keep the work, how to grow. And that's why these HR partners like myself are here to say, okay, while we're doing that, let's think about mental health. Let's think about let's coach the managers on how we can make this situation work. So I do believe that's sometimes part of the red tape besides the politics and just being open to coaching and counseling of our people.
Frank.
No, I don't want to always have to go, right? I don't want to lean in and take up space of, like, to Mary's point. Things have been said. Okay, then I'll just add the research piece of it. because I geek out over research and recent publications, especially meta-analysis that just basically say the things that we're saying, and then there's just the evidence to go with it, right? There was a really good research by Dr. Elvis Ruiz recently. So that authenticity you were talking about from yesterday's panel, but also what we're talking about here, the teachable things, absolutely. Anything that can release those positive endorphins in us. And his research was authenticity tied with self-awareness and exercise. So exercise or any activity that gets you going so that you release these endorphins, so that you fill your own cup and you're able to almost empty out your compassion and positivity a little bit more onto others. So that's an easy thing, right? Whatever can release those endorphins. It's just stating the things that you already know. I think the other thing is what you were asking the original question about the barrier, it's toxic positivity. So that's that recent literature and phenomena that you hear about. So toxic positivity is this, fear of being left out, or missing out, FOMO culture and other things, because, there's cultures of no, cultures of yes, these shut down kind of cutthroat type cultures. But even in that culture of yes, where like the extroverts take up the space and the speed at which we do things, right, can be that barrier to slow down and connect. And everybody's this false consensus of agreement, right? So what I would back up beyond that is really capability building, ownership, and accountability that's been said here. Our capability, I'll just throw this out there. I think one of the things is that sometimes as we go from an actual kind of tactical leader to a people leader and tactical, we don't build our own capabilities. To kind of Rusty's point, we don't continue like, all right, let me learn more about some of the best effective things out there. How do I go from function to cover, right, for my folks, and drive that in my meetings, 5-minute touch points, 10-minute touch points, a quick little, and make it genuine. But sometimes too, because I work in EIB, I'd be remiss by saying by 1 in 66, 1 in 40 or so actually have autism and could be on that spectrum and undiagnosed. And that's a global thing, right? So why that's important is that a barrier can also be ourselves and how we communicate. There's neurodiversity. There's so many other, there's personal lived experiences of, trauma and other things where if we can heal from that and figure out what are our best ways to navigate, then we can fill the cup for others. And I just want to put out there and make it real, because we're not all built at that capacity to be able to bring in others. So it goes back to that learning around us, and the perks that are around us are great. Mary talked about policies. The research says that too, like policies and perks are great, but how often are they accountability, right? How often are they actually used by, whether we're a senior leader, we're always still accountable to someone else. So unless we see that around us, those half-day Fridays, those live well days, right? All these different things that are making us compassionate to the lives of others. If you're still online and folks that we're still going to get it done, the unwritten rules, right? It really doesn't matter. And it's not showing compassion the way it's written out, because behaviorally it's just not there, right? So, and I would just say the last thing is, going from accountability to ownership of it is a risk sometimes for us as leaders to really own up to, I don't know everything and I don't have that. And I'm almost going to put my brand in corporate America, or global, I'm going to put my brand at risk by saying I don't have that answer. Yeah. And I want compassion to go along with that. If it's not embedded in that culture, which is what I started off with, it's hard to, honestly, because we get looked at a little bit different. Like I thought Frank was the go-to for a lot of things, and all of a sudden he said he can't get things done. No, that's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying there's a lot of personal things getting in the way that I need a little bit time and pushing back and protecting my yes, right? Protect my yes. Not so much what I say no to, but protecting my yes and what I consistently say yes to what Rusty was saying earlier. That culture's still there from the 80s, 90s, and 70s, right? That they get it done regardless of what the barriers are. And there's almost a reduction of compassion still.
That's a great point, and I'm just looking at the watch, and it's absolutely incredible how we're 20 minutes away from wrapping this up, and I wish we had an entire series. But My next question comes first with thanks in advance for indulging me half a minute to talk about one of the best reads of this year for me. It's a book called Deep Kindness, written by a guy, Houston Kraft. And he explains kindness across 3 layers. Common kindness, which is basically pleasantries and, thank yous and please and how are you. The second layer is what he calls confetti kindness. And confetti kindness is based on those posters, like spread kindness everywhere like it's confetti, it's free. And although positive in messaging, it does hurt kindness in the sense that it takes the intentionality and the effort behind it away. And then there's deep kindness that talks about kindness that comes from a place of who you are after deep inner work. And it's kindness almost in spite, convenience, and context. And oftentimes, deep kindness comes from a place of resilience because you do it, even though it was misreceived in the past, but you still do it. So, with this in mind, I have a question. How can we have not just compassionate leaders, but ambassadors of kindness and compassion in our organizations, decoupled from hierarchy, mandate, role, and seniority, especially amongst people who might have been misunderstood or misinterpreted or taken advantage of in the past by showing kindness and compassion? And Tammy, I would really love to have you go first for this one.
Thank you. And I feel like I need to read that book now. I truly believe that there's a couple things that need to happen to empower a workforce or individuals to be the best versions of themselves. And I think kindness is part of being the best version of yourself. It's compassion and empathy, right? I think that, it's important for individuals to be given permission to be themselves. So an open conversation, whether it's leadership down, whether it's cultural statements, whether it's employees, employee peer-to-peer, right? But there has to be a level of permission given to people to be, as true to themselves as they can be without that judgment or fear of past, issues maybe with being looked down upon for being kind or accountable. I think the other thing is, certainly lead by example, and, those who are in leadership roles need to be vulnerable and transparent and open, and demonstrate, that type of attitude and that type of outlook, if you will. And third, I think it's important, when we think about kindness, it's a contagious disease in a good way, right? Like the more someone is kind to another person, the more that person's kind to the next person and so forth. And so I believe, that's part of it too, and recognizing kindness in each other, calling it out, and just using that as a springboard for more.
I love how we build up to the mic drop moments. I see this stacking up of sayings. Rusty, I saw you unmuted, please.
Yeah, I just wanted to share this idea that, in terms of being an ambassador of compassion, one of the things that came up over and over again in this year-long course I mentioned, the Stanford class, is the phrase "small is all," with the idea that it's the small things that make all the difference. And so this could be, before a meeting starts, just kind of checking and looking at someone and saying, "Hey, good morning. Nice to see you here." Right? Just recognizing the personal connection before they start. Acknowledging somebody's good contribution, giving them recognition, right? Again, recognition doesn't have to be this big thing. It could be, "Hey, Mary, I really loved what you just said. That was great." Checking in with somebody, right? But then also leading with not just asking them about themselves, sharing a little bit about yourself. Like, "Hey, I had this is what happened on the weekend." So all of these little things, they're small, right? It's not like if you want to be compassionate, it's this huge amorphous thing that you have to tackle. It can be several little small things. And as an ambassador of compassion, it doesn't matter where you are in the organization. It doesn't matter if you become the person that's like, "Hey, every time I'm in a meeting with Julie, I love it because she just comes up to me, she's like, 'Hey, Rusty, good morning. It's nice to see you here.'" Right? And it doesn't matter what position Julie's in. It doesn't matter anything. It's just she starts to do that. And it's like, oh, cool. I'm in that meeting with Julie. And then you start doing it because that's just becomes part of the meeting. So an individual taking small action can make a huge difference.
I love that, Rusty. I can add from not just the actions that you take, but the actions that you reinforce as well. I'm a big believer in positive reinforcement. And when you have the voice in the room to be able to do that, don't just recognize the great work, recognize the kindness over and over again until people start to do it as well. And it becomes your culture, it becomes how you operate, not just, you know, a value on the wall.
Yeah. Frank, you want to go now just for a change, and then Mary will bring us home? No, Mary.
I'm aligned with Frank on this one. I mean, you know, everything has been said, nicely said. There's been different twists, but we're all saying the same thing. I love that, you know, the Tammy kicked us off, but Rusty, you made a comment in there in regards to it doesn't matter what position, what title that you hold, you can still lead in the same way. The example still can be set by that one person just showing up. And I would just add the piece of just being authentic, right? Because this is all about trust. If I can trust you, I can be myself. And, you know, if I see that you are kind, and just say, for instance, if I have a conversation with you and I see that represented kindness in our conversation, and I might even feel as comfortable enough to share something with you that I might not have shared. But if I know that that conversation has not shown up anywhere else, I can trust that you are kind, right? So sometimes it's just, it's the personal flair. And if we start to be more personable in the workplace at times, you know, sharing information with people. Like, I'm a firm believer. I'm always talking about my daughter. She is everything. So she just turned 1, but I'm always trying to see how in situations, not just trying to be relatable to every situation, but I want people to know where my priority is at. So sometimes I might be on camera, and again, I'm the head of people, right, for the Americas. And my daughter is showing up on some of these, you know, and she might say a little something in the back. It's not a habit that I continue to have, but I want them to see she is a priority for me. And if I need to pivot sometimes to take care of that, the work will always get done. But that also shows my heart. That shows how kind I am. That shows the type of person I am. So people can see that. The work is the work, but I always want people to be able to see me. So I'll pause in case Frank wants to say something on that note.
I'd love to share a little. Since Frank's not talking, I'll fill the space. No, I wanted to share just a little story, just because this is just talking about the position and you know, like, it doesn't matter what level you are on the team, any of that stuff. So back in, I don't know how many years ago, 7-8 years ago or something like that, I described, like, myself, I grew up in this mindset of do your work and leave the personal stuff behind. So a new person joined my team, and she was just like so personable. You know, so if someone's birthday, she's going to get the cake. You know, she finds out when their birthday is, first of all, and then she brings in the cake and all that. And I just noticed, even in myself, like, some part of me is like, you know, it's fun to have someone bringing in a cake on a birthday and all that. And there's a part of me that's, yeah, but we have work to do. Right. So it's like just noticing, even in myself, this internal struggle. But I'm sharing this story because this person worked for me, and she was the driver of kindness on the team more than I was. And, you know, I can see that now. And I look back and I was like, oh, that's interesting. You know, that's just where I was at that point. But again, talking about personal learning and growth and so on, now I see much more of that much more clearly than I did at the time. But I just wanted to share it as an example of it doesn't matter, right? Like, you can influence your boss. You can influence your boss's boss by the way you show up. So I just want to make that point again. I just think it's really important, because so many people are like, well, yeah, but the company's not kind and it's not compassionate and that's all this. And I was like, well, you can make a difference.
That's wonderful. I'm so sorry. I see Julie dropped off. Let's hope that the internet is kind enough to help her get back into this conversation for the wrap up. But We have about nine more minutes to go, and that's the problem. If I get to mention one book, then every question will come, inspired from a book. Mindful of the fact that October is our mental health and well-being month, there's a book called "Why Has Nobody Told Me This Before?" Why has nobody told me this before? And hi, Julie, welcome back. And my question is, what is one thing that you learn about kindness and compassion in the workplace, and you learned it probably the hard way, the frustrating way, the painful way, the long way, and it was one of those, why hasn't anybody told me this before? And Frank, I will ask you to lead us into this round.
I'll stick with the compassion piece. I think the hardest thing that I've learned is we're talking about it from the leadership perspective. I want to talk about it from the followership. And I even saw in the chat that people were asking, how do I define that? So just look at leadership as leaders enable or inspire, fill in the blank for yourself. Again, followers, we're accountable to somebody else, and that even your CEO is accountable to a board, your board is accountable to shareholders, etc. Your organization is you're always accountable to somebody else. Followership is just how we allow ourselves to be enabled or inspired, right? And the hardest lesson I ever had was I obviously can share, overshare, and just throw things, like to Mary's point, like things that are very important to me, being a father, being a husband, being a caregiver to my father who goes to dialysis 3 times a week, to, just all the burdens of leadership I have and my personal baggage. But the hardest thing I have to do is what I expect from leaders to be personal around me as well. So I purposely, in our meetings, whoa, slow down. How's everybody doing? Whoa, slow down. Let's end with a high note. Whoa, I get it that everybody's burnt out, this and that. What's going on, right? That is actually a really hard lesson to learn, because you can easily just fall into the culture and say, I'm not going to be that people person. No, I expect this. And if I'm not getting that, and you can influence it, but if I'm not getting that, that says a lot about your environment right there. That 60-40, right? This 40% is going to be really hard to nudge back, and it's going to impact my 60% of who I am. Right. So what you expect that.
Thank you. Now, who wants to follow? I see Gladys is planning on starting Monday with a Starbucks. Gladys, do you hire? I can apply and be there for the Starbucks on Monday. Okay, who's next?
I'll jump in. I've always got something to say. So one of the things Gladys also said is the session felt therapeutic. And I'm reflecting on, one of the things I appreciate about this is everyone's willingness to share. And Mary, you said that as you were talking about your daughter, be open about who you are. And, back to, again, how I kind of entered the workforce and my training and all that kind of stuff. Like the way I came in was, you don't show who you are at work. That stays behind. And my goal at work was always to look great, to be smart, to get their answer right, to have people respect me. Like it was there was a lot of image management going on at work. And I would say it took me a long time, decades of my life, to figure out this to find the courage and to actually understand what vulnerability means. So even the little story I shared about, being the boss who was trying to squash the birthday celebrations, right? Like that's a little bit of a vulnerable story, because I'm like, it wasn't the best part of me. And, now I sit here and say, yeah, you should connect with people, and isn't compassion great? But that wasn't me 7 or 8 years ago. And so just a willingness to share that, to me, is to let go of this idea that I have to do it right. I have to be perfect. I have to impress people all the time. That to me has been something that's been hard to learn. And it's been something I've had to practice. And yet it's also been very freeing, because, I think another thing that Frank mentioned at one point was you don't have to have all the answers. And again, that's a vulnerable thing when you're the boss or you're whatever, you're trying to look good and be smart. And all of that. And it's like, you don't have the answers. That feels a little vulnerable. Or to say, I screwed up, that still feels a little vulnerable. But, or even to say, I've got a daughter at home that like, she's crying, I need to care for her. That can feel vulnerable too. So being willing to lean into that and be a little bit more who you are, that took me a long time to learn.
Thank you so much. Julie.
I'm afraid to speak because I don't want my internet to cut out again.
We will take every second we have with you. So please.
Great. So for me, I think one of the things that I personally needed to learn to be a compassionate leader is to slow down. I'm very impatient. I don't know if that comes across or not in the conversation, but that's more about my personality. And I have very high expectations of myself. And so putting those expectations on others has made me learn to say, am I giving that person what they need from me in the moment? I am not a very big conversationalist. I tend to get right to business as my collaboration style. But I work with recruiters in HR. A lot of them really love to chat. And there are certain people where I know that might not be what I need, but that's what they need. So how can I create that space so that we can really get to know each other at that person level? And for me, it's not what I needed, but I didn't know that that's what I needed. And I learned so much by slowing down to say, what does this person need from me in the moment?
That's wonderful. Let's see who goes for the hot seat of going last. Tammy.
I feel like I already shared my story at the beginning. You know, I think the biggest lesson and the most painful lesson I wish I'd learned earlier was that I was, not being the best version of a leader because I was emulating others' behaviors, and not, to bring up inequities here, but I think, being a woman in a male-dominated world, as a young person, I thought that's how you were successful. So I was following in my boss at the time, and he's still a mentor to me today. So I'm not speaking ill of him, but, first generation Italian, grew up in New Jersey. So had a very strong, firm, assertive behavior. And, for me to do that, I wasn't honoring my gifts of being relationship oriented and being connected to people, and caring and being empathetic. So, I found out through performance review, right? Like, oh, shoot, I'm not behaving in a way that's probably serving me in the best way possible. So I think, the biggest lesson I, share in that first, know your values, right? Know who you are and try to honor that as much as you can. And two, feedback is such an amazing thing, right? Whether you're giving it to somebody else who maybe has a lesson to learn, or hearing it, getting it from somebody else in return, and not being afraid to ask for that feedback and to really hear that feedback. I think that's such a powerful thing, giving and receiving to allow you to be the best version of yourself.
Thank you so very much. Mary, please bring us home on this one.
Where do I start? So, lessons learned. I've worked in different industries. I've worked for different personality styles, different people. I've experienced where sometimes some have come off and have started meetings to ask, how are you feeling? And then would use sometimes the information that they were getting from how people were feeling to kind of say, well, this is why they're behaving that way, because they feel unhappy or they feel this way. So I regret not. I love the experiences that I had because those have formed me to the person that I am today. And it's also taught me to be more comfortable with who I am. And I stand in that. And I'll pause because I'll just leave it on that note.
Thank you so very much, Mary, Rusty, Tammy, Frank, and Julie, for being here today and for showing up so kindly and compassionately and so vulnerably. And also thank you everybody in the audience for staying with us throughout the conversation. This is definitely a recording that I'm going to share with my colleagues, with my friends. And it will definitely have rippling effects in our world. Thank you, everyone. What a way to send us off into the weekend. And I am very much looking forward to welcome you to future conversations. And until then, just, in a world where you can be anything, just be kind. It's all there is. Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Jessa, and speak soon. Thank you.